Have I got a treat for you today? Time is tricky, and our language about time is even more tricky. Augustine famously said that he knows exactly what time is until you ask him to define it. And I don't think that there is a single person alive who has done more hard work to clarify their language and their thinking and their definitions around what time is than Dr. Ryan Mullins. He is an intellectual heavyweight. He has a wonderful, wonderful ministry talking about the philosophy of time. He's got a bunch of letters after his name that tells you he's done a lot of academic work, but he's an absolutely delightful person to talk to. And more importantly, I think that his view out of all of the biblical options, out of all of the philosophical options, is the one that does the most honor and does the least violence to the pages of Scripture themselves and honors the way that God presents himself. Now, there may be a couple of things that we talk about where we disagree, and you have to be a pretty smart person to disagree with Ryan Mullins, but I think it was an edifying conversation, and in fact, there's a lot here that if you're a recent viewer of my debate will lead you to see there are even more possibilities to explain my position and even fewer to explain my opponent's position. So get your thinking caps on. This one's going to be a little bit heady, but if you can soldier through and make it to the end, I think that you'll be much, much richer for it, and I hope that this becomes one of those resources you point people to when you want to talk about God and time. So without further ado, here's Ryan Mullins.
Okay, so again, Dr. Mullins or Ryan, which one do you prefer?
It doesn't matter because I've got too many titles. So Ryan's it's just easier.
How many letters do we stack onto the end of your name before we get it exactly accurate? So
I think it's like 5 or 6. And then if you throw in Reverend in there, then you get, like it's a lot.
We will stick with Ryan for the purposes of this conversation, but just understand that all the respect I can stack onto the name Ryan with all the letters before and after are all, every time I utter the name, that's kind of what I'm feeling when I say it. So we'll just go with that.
There we go.
So Ryan, I really appreciate your willingness to come in and talk to me about this because, as you know, obviously I just had a debate with James White, and it's not as though this is the only place that this happens. In fact, it's so pervasive that we kind of have to address it on a really wide level, but we have really flabby language around time. And I just wanted to tee you up with, there's a Doctor Who quote that I'm sure you're familiar with, which is that time is like a big ball of wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. And I think that that's about as accurate a definition to what people actually think as any that I could find. There's the Augustine quote also of like, I know what time is until you ask me. So first off, why do you think that our language around time is so flabby? Why do we have such mixed up definitions? Is it just that it's very difficult to understand and therefore very difficult to define? Or what do you think is at work in us having such bad language around time?
This is a problem that's bothered me for quite a long time, actually, is going, why won't anybody tell me what time is? So like your average introduction will start with that Augustine quote and then go, we'll just move on. And I'm like, no. Answer the question. Like, I know it's funny when because Augustine has a lot of jokes, but he's like, yeah, I know what it is, and let's ask me. And then we're like, move on. And I'm like, no. So Augustine explains it slightly. He's like, it's this very familiar stranger. Like time is something you experience every conscious moment. It's so close to you that it's hard to figure out how exactly to talk about it. And that's what you see him struggle for like the next several chapters in the Confessions, is he's trying to capture the entire temporal landscape and different aspects of it. Like, how do I measure time? Because they didn't have like very consistent clocks. So he's like, well, what if I sing a song in my head? So time is like the extension of the mind, is what he says. And people go nuts over that and say the stupidest things when all he's trying to do is, I'm just trying to come up with a measurement system. That's all, bro. Like, it's not time is consciousness or something like mystical like that. So you've got that kind of problem, is that it's so close to you, it's hard to figure out. The second problem is you've got a million different things in the temporal landscape that you're trying to capture. Duration, measurements, change before and after, and then like, what's the thing that makes all of that possible? There's all these different features you're trying to get at. And then the third thing, though this is the most pervasive problem, I think, is spatial metaphors. We use spatial metaphors constantly to talk about time. So we'll say things are like inside of time, outside of time. Time's like this box that things could be located in. And that is where it gets really messy in a lot of different debates in theology, is people are like, well, God's outside of time. I'm like, tell me what that means. And they're like, he's outside of the thing. I'm like, outside of the what? And they're like, he's just outside and he creates it. I'm like, well, what is this thing that he's, and then they just give me like all these different spatial metaphors. And I'm like, you do know that space and time are not the same thing, right? Like, do you know that? Because I don't think you do. And so then we just get lost in metaphors. And when we're metaphoring about metaphors, we're not going to get anywhere in theology.
Okay, right. And so this is another thing I've noticed. So people will appeal to almost poetic, metaphorical expressions of time, where you might have someone in like an Orthodox tradition, like in the Divine Liturgy, for example,
Hmm.
talk about remembering the second coming, and that's an ostensibly future event, right?
Hmm.
Remember, when they're saying remembering it, they're remember sounds like a past word. Like, you could say, if we're trying to be rigorous, something like remembering that the second coming is coming, or something like that,
Right.
right? But that's not the way that it's phrased. And so then
No.
people really latch onto the way that certain things are phrased, and that combination of poetic language, often metaphorical language, flowery, time is a there's such a an interesting sort of romantic
Hmm.
space around time. Sorry to use the word space again,
Yeah.
um, but all of that, coupled with really poorly defined words, leads to really muddied thinking. So I think the next thing I would like for us, I really wanted to get you and get your help with this, and I'm asking for help
Hmm.
personally because I think I need help with this. Is how do we start to even get our head around defining some of these things? And, we have an existing thousands of years of argument from lots of different theological and not even theological traditions, just
Hmm.
maybe even physics, right? And all kinds of different angles trying to put definitions to some of these ideas. How do we even start to get our head around these things? And then how do we start to get a foothold where we can start to maybe get, okay, this one's clear. And then we can sort of extrapolate from clear definitions to find some clarity on the unclear one.
Yeah. So one of the things I did was over the last decade and a half, I guess, was just try to go through and just catalog, here's all the different definitions that people have given, and then try to figure out, is this one actually just a metaphor or is it actually something like literal? And it's surprisingly, the number of metaphorical statements they significantly outweigh the number of literal theories, because the number of literal theories, there's
Mm,
basically two, which is kind of shocking. And then this is including like Eastern religions too. This is not just like the West. So the two different views, both of what they're trying to do is they're trying to capture that thing I mentioned earlier, the temporal landscape. So kind of like when you're doing moral philosophy, there's sometimes they'll talk
mm,
about the moral landscape. You've got obligations, virtue, vice, responsibility, like a lot of different things you're trying to capture. And so like where your moral theory is trying to get all of that. When you're doing time, I want to say the same thing. There's a whole host of different features of reality you're trying to capture, and so, whatever your theory of time is going to try to do that. So the two different views, there's what's called the relational theory. Sometimes it's called the reductionist theory, and then there's the absolute theory. So the relational or the reductionist theory, there's a lot of different versions of it, because they're all so ill-defined. And this
mm,
is something that gets commented on. That like Newton Smith, not Isaac Newton, but this other guy named Newton Smith. He says it's a theory so like popular that people didn't even bother to define it. And I'm like, that doesn't help at all. This is not good.
no.
So
Mm,
what you're trying to do here is you go, okay, what things exist in the world? And so like potholes. I don't know about you, but like in Indiana, we had a lot of potholes so bad that Domino's Pizza offered to fill them in, when Pete Buttigieg was the mayor of South Bend. This was a real thing. You can look it up. Do you think potholes exist, or do you think it's just the road happens to be missing some pieces?
yeah, very interesting. I think that the definition of a pothole is a gap in an otherwise complete road,
Yeah. So it's not
but it
like
is
there's
a
this.
thing that exists. Yeah,
Yeah, because
interesting.
we're trying to avoid it, but so what we're doing here is what's called a paraphrase. Where there's this thing in reality, like a road, and then there's like a bunch of missing pieces, and you could say like while you're driving, like beware of that perforation in the road, or beware of the missing piece. No, you're just like a pothole. So it's not like there's a thing that's a pothole. It's just like it's just a miss. It's easier to say pothole and talk about it as if it's a thing, when really you can reduce it down to it's just the road is missing like some pieces. It's an absence.
Hmm,
So what the reductionist theory of time is doing this. It's saying time is not a thing in reality. It is reducible to something else that is concretely there in reality. And
mm,
so the project of the relational or the reductionist theory is to try to find that item in reality that does exist, that is concrete, and that we can really reduce time down to. We still talk about
mm.
time, but it's just a paraphrase. So the common example is usually change. And then, but you're like, well, tell me what a change is. And they're like, well, change is a before and after,
Yeah.
or things
But
being
what do you
different
mean
ways
by
at different times.
before and after? You're smuggling time into the
Correct.
definition.
Yes.
Okay.
And so Aristotle gets like, so Galen, this ancient philosopher and medical doctor, he gives Aristotle a lot of crap for this. Like, so he's like, you got this bizarre circularity here, and Aristotle's like, well, what if maybe we try again? And so Aristotle gives like a bunch of different like kind of nebulous sort of answers to try to get out of these sort of worries. And every single attempt at it, I think, just ends up failing because they all sneak in time back into the story. And so I want to go like, this is a dead end. It's just viciously circular. You're not getting anywhere. Why don't you just say time's really a thing in the world? And that's exactly what the absolute theory does. So the absolute theory says time is an actual substance. It's an actual substance, it's a thing in the world. And it has a lot of different features. One of those important features is it's this natured entity that makes change possible. It's the thing that explains why change is possible. It also is the thing that is the source of moments, because a moment is the way things are, but could be subsequently otherwise, like at another moment. What is the source of those moments? Like, what makes those moments exist? Time does. What takes a bunch of those different moments and unifies them into a coherent timeline? Time does. And so time is supposed to be this eternal, ubiquitous thing that extends everywhere and plays all these different kind of roles. And so it's this actual thing. And so that's the absolute theory of time. There's a couple different versions of it, though. These are easier to identify because they don't encounter the same kind of problems. They actually say unique things. So the main two are time really is just this substance, eternal, uncaused substance, just hanging out there. And it's just always been there. No further explanation needed. The other popular view that you see is no, God is actually time. So it's proper to say this is an essential attribute of God because God is this eternal uncaused substance that plays all these different roles. So you see that in like Isaac Newton, you see that in Raghunatha Shiromani in the Hindu tradition. So there's a lot of different people who have these kind of views.
Fascinating. Okay, so that's really helpful. Just a big, broad level, right? So yeah, I immediately intuitively grasp that I'm not a reductionist because I think that time ontologically is a thing that exists. It is real. The nature of it and how we kind of come to explain it is a different set of issues, but it would be under the sort of absolutist position. But saying that it's reducible to something else, I think just inevitably, because I think it is real, you're just going to find over and over that you're going to be smuggling in the definition, like the thing, into the definition of the thing. So you're going to be, like you said, viciously circular. Now there may be things I would say, if we're talking about a temporal landscape, which is looking at all of these different concepts and ideas in the language and in the ontological world of time, there may be things that themselves are like reducible or that are separate from, like, there's not an actual thing there, like a vicissitude. If I were to describe what a vicissitude is, it's just a gap between moments, right? It's a gap between things happening. So the gap between when I last spent time with my best friend and the next time I'm going to spend time with my best friend is a gap of time. It's a span of time. Yeah. But it's, it doesn't necessarily refer to something that's absolute. It's just maybe a measurement word.
Correct.
But, yeah. So the ontology of time in this, and this could refer to a couple of other things, and I think we'll probably get into presentism and eternalism here in a minute, but just whether or not it exists, the reductionist view would say no, it's abstracted onto something else. But the absolutist view is yes, it exists. Now what is kind of the next question.
Correct. Yeah. And the now what is important to your earlier question of how do we talk about time better? Because the absolute theory says you need to distinguish between time and moments of time. And so a lot of our temporal language, a lot of our talk is pointing out features of a timeline or a series of moments. So when you talked about like the gap between seeing your friend, you're talking about temporal distance relationships, a relationship between one moment and another moment on the timeline. When we talk about before and after, or I talk about change of things being in incompatible ways at different moments, I'm talking about features of a timeline. When I talk about clocks, which is what physics is primarily interested in, those are properties or features of a series of moments or a timeline. They're not time itself, it's the things that time makes possible. the things that time is the undergirding thing that explains all the phenomena. So trying to get clear on those things, that's something I've only come to this realization a few years ago. And I have not figured out the best way to go about talking about this stuff. Because at the moment, I'm still just trying to convince everyone, let's start thinking about this issue in the way that I'm telling you to think about it, because it's way better than what we've been doing for the last, 1,000 years or so.
Yeah, hills to die on, fires to put out, and all that.
Exactly.
So let's explore that for a minute. Just is there a meaningful difference, for example, between an event and a moment? Is an event something that takes place in a moment? That's kind of like the way that I would think about it. But
That's
again,
how I think is, yeah. So
Okay.
so when I looked at the reductionist theory before, a lot of times people want to reduce time down to events. And then when you look through all these different like introductions to metaphysics textbooks, they'll have like a section on events, and you're like, what is an event? And they're like, an event is a substance having a property at a time. And you're like, cool, thanks, man. But so I think it's a good definition of an event, because that's true. Like it's something happening, and there's a when things happen. But I don't think you can construct like time out of events. I don't think you should reduce them down to each other. And one reason being because there's a when events happen. Another is lots of different kinds of events can be happening at the same series of moments. So the event of you and I like having this conversation, well, there's a million things happening out on the street in Philadelphia right now. We don't need to talk
Mhm.
about any of them because they're all violent and awful and gross. But like those are separate events. They're not identical to this
Mm.
event, but they're overlapping in terms of the series of moments that they're taking place.
They all exist in the same moment, right? So when we refer to an event, we're referring to something that occurs in a moment. So a single, any given moment, if you were able to stop the flow of time,
Mhm.
you would be able to see any number of events transpiring in lots of different contexts, but all taking place in the same temporal moment.
Correct. Yeah. Because so, like I said before, a moment is the way things are, but could be subsequently otherwise. So it's like a
Right.
total like look at like this is everything that's happening, because it really is. This is the entire way things are, and they could be
Okay.
different at the next moment. But yeah. So it's a
Right.
slice of reality.
And so this is going to, I don't want to import too many things, because then I want to talk about logical moments, but logical moments only exist if you posit that God isn't temporal in some way. And that's going to be a whole other thing when we get to like eternalism and presentism.
There's supposed to, as a preview, they're supposed to be able to fit into a single temporal or a single timeless moment. They're supposed to be, but
Right.
we can talk about those later.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But we've got events, we've got moments, we've got a concept of arrangement of those moments and
Mhm.
ways that things could be subsequently otherwise. So subsequently, baked into that word is the word sequence, right?
Correct.
So there is an arrangement of these things that is I think of this as almost like a unilateral flow,
Mhm.
where there are things that you can't have a circular or web-like arrangement of moments. They are sequential.
Yeah.
Right? Is that a fair thing to assume, or how do we get to that definition?
I think so. I thought about this problem a lot because there's this question in philosophy of time about the direction of time, and why can't time go in the other direction? And the view that I affirm is what's called like primitivism about the arrow of time. That time just necessarily goes in one direction. End of story. And people are like,
Mhm.
well, why? Why couldn't it go in another direction? And I'm like, and eventually came to the conclusion that the reason people ask those kinds of questions is because they're still thinking in terms of spatial metaphors. When I say
Right.
time has a direction, that's a spatial notion that I've snuck in. Whereas if I say a moment is the way things are, but could be subsequently otherwise, there's no spatial stuff there. Like it's
Right.
just purely temporal. And so you're
The
like, oh,
minute you
right.
said direction, I was like,
Right. But it took me forever to see this because like all the debates about this, they are just put in terms of direction of time. Why this direction and not another direction? And so I'm like, well, could a moment of time be the way things are, but could be subsequently previously otherwise? Is basically what you're asking. And that just sounds stupid on its face. And I'm like, right, when you get
Right.
rid of the spatial stuff and put it in purely temporal terms, because we're talking about time stuff, then the absurdity of time going backwards, it's right there on the surface. And you would see it immediately and go, oh, that's dumb. Why would I waste my time thinking about that question? And that's what I think should be is like, why did people waste hundreds of years thinking about a dumb question when it was just, yeah. But that's just me
Good.
being cranky in my old age. But yeah.
Sure, old age. No, but I'm 32 and I'm plenty frustrated by this already. So I think I'm on the same page. So again, I deeply appreciate that. I think that that's all very intuitive to our experience of time as well. I think that one of the other issues, and this is definitely, I will say this probably mostly comes to us from the theological realm of where this language even comes from, is assumptions about what God must be like lead to other assumptions about how time might be structured or natured, right?
Mhm.
And I have you probably you might not have even known this about me at all until we got into this conversation, but I have a very strong like suspicion of anything that's rooted in Greek philosophy and thought.
Mhm.
It's just kind of one of my hobby horses, especially
Sure.
like as a Christian. I like pointing out how Jewish thought is very different from Greek thought, and how ancient Hebrew categories and even ancient Near Eastern categories in that same context into which the Hebrew Bible
Mhm.
was written are very different from worldview assumptions that show up later in sort of the Greek. And all when I say Greek, that's obviously another huge umbrella
Sure.
term
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
encompassing, you know, uh, Epicureanism and Stoicism and
Yeah,
all kinds of
lots of
different
different schools
Gnosticism.
of thought. Yeah, yeah.
Right. But one of the things that they seem to share is an assumption that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. This is my understanding as a layman, just kind of looking at this. But when it comes to even like space and matter and material things, they have a sense that, well, what's material is bad and what's immaterial is what's perfect, and what's perfect must be unchanging. And there are so many philosophical assumptions baked into that that when you start to posit things, if you just grant all of that and lay that down into your sort of axiomatic furniture on top of which you're building the rest of your
Mhm.
beliefs, then you start to come up with views about what God must be like and what his relationship to time must be based on those prior commitments. And I don't
Yeah.
think we know even what those prior commitments are. So this is all very good for me to kind of like get this out and talk about it, because I don't think we, especially in the Christian tradition, and I'm just sort of rambling now and I'm sorry
Mhm.
about that, but in the Christian tradition, part of why we have such a hard time defining things is that we want to affirm scripture on one hand and what scripture teaches clearly, or at least demonstrates that it asserts to be true by assuming it.
Mhm.
And then we want to have that, but then we also want to have definitions that have taken us, that have come to us from thousands of years of theological discussion and interaction with our philosophical neighbors or our people in our context. And we've been doing this for thousands of years. So we get all these kind of lumped in issues in terms of how we even think about the nature of reality, not just time, but then how time relates to space and matter and things like that. So I don't know if that tees you up into anything interesting, but I'm just sort of expressing a
Yeah.
frustration that I feel
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, no. So I don't want to exaggerate the difference between like biblical and Greek ways of thinking, but they are there. I mean, they are really there. For instance, when you look at the nature of God, you see something very different in a lot of Aristotelian and Platonic thought than you see in Scripture. Because in a lot of Aristotelian and Platonic thought, you see this being that cannot change in any way, shape, or form. According to Aristotle, can't even know any contingent truths at all. Uh, doesn't know that you exist, cannot possibly care about you. And Aristotle says, well, if God did know all that stuff, and if he did actually cause the universe to exist, was like if God actually was the efficient cause of the universe, like he created it. If God did
Mhm.
that, then he'd be changing and he wouldn't be perfect. And so you see all this stuff of going, hang on. So it looks like God's not really omniscient, and God's not the creator of the universe. And and that's supposed to be like this perfect being? I mean, that is very different from the biblical picture of God. So, so in one sense, I don't want to exaggerate, but that difference is very real and very, very significant and very important. And but I don't want to fault the past too much, because every single one of us are born into some kind of cultural context, and we can transcend our context. We're not like slaves to our like cultural milieu, by the very fact that we debate our cultural milieu all the time. I mean, all the culture wars we have right now, they're completely asinine, but like all we're
Yeah.
doing is just debating them. So we have these debates that we are usually in interaction with what's around us. And so when you look at a lot of the early Christians, the scientific, the philosophical baggage of that time comes from a particular system or set of systems, and they're interacting with those. And so they're developing Christian thought accordingly. So I can't fault them for that. But
Yeah,
it is
we don't want to
important.
engage in chronological snobbery, but neither do
No,
we want to engage in backwards chronological elitism, where just because it's
exactly.
old, that must mean that it's true.
Yeah, because there's this democracy of the dead that G.K. Chesterton talks about, and I'm like,
Mm,
that sounds good. Like people in the past, they have a vote, like they gave reasons
mhm.
for why they believe these things. but let's not have like a tyranny of the dead or some sort of dictatorship of the dead, which you see a lot in contemporary Christian thought and Christian apologetics, where a bunch of my favorite set of dead people in the past, they said these things, therefore it's true. And if I
Right.
point out, if I come along and go, actually, there's another set of dead people at that same time period who are like open theists, they're like, no, 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 but they don't count. They don't count as the real, they're not the real tradition. And you're like, huh? Okay. Yeah. So I don't want to engage in that nonsense because, we don't have time for that. We're trying to figure out truth. So we don't have time to deal with BS.
Yeah, truth is an idea meritocracy. The thing that is the most that corresponds best with reality is the thing that is most true, right?
Yes.
That's my again, not to be this is not chronological snobbery. This is maybe just garden variety snobbery, but that's my take on this is
Yeah.
that I'm a big correspondence theory of truth guy, and that'll get into
Mhm.
Truthmakers kind of as this
Mhm.
conversation progresses as well. But um, is this a logical time to talk about logical moments? Or is this something we would want to maybe introduce when we talk about eternalism and presentism? And is that the next thing? Or are there things in between that once we've gotten to kind of an absolutist and maybe primitivist direction of time
Mhm.
definition, what is the next thing that we kind of need to make sense of in order for this to not fall like a house of cards?
Yeah, so let's talk about the ontology of moments, and then that sets us up to talk about is time created or not, and then there we can go like about all the dynamic omniscience thing and figure out like
Hmm.
what on earth were these people trying to get at, and also we need the ontology of time stuff to figure out how to define timelessness and temporality because those are assumptions that are in the table. So yeah, so what we're talking about the ontology of time. This is a question about what moments of time exist. So I said like a moment is the way things are, but could be subsequently otherwise. But there's this question of which moments exist. And the two most popular views today are presentism and eternalism. So presentism has been the overwhelming majority view until around the time of Einstein. I keep finding historians say, "What about this person over here? That they look like they rejected presentism." I'm like, doesn't it? Whereas I do know there's some medieval Buddhist debates where is actually really clear that they are debating presentism versus eternalism without those labels. But here's the presentist says. It's right there in the name. The present is the only moment that exists. That's it. Past moments, when they were present, they existed, but those are gone. Those moments are gone. The future moments, like they're coming, but like they don't exist because when is present, that's it. Present exhausts reality. Whereas the
Okay.
eternalist goes, all the things on the timeline exist. Like all those moments exist. They're just as real as the present. And technically speaking, you really shouldn't talk about the present. There's just all these different locations. They're all there. So the year 2525, it's there just as real as like this moment is. You're like, it's just as real. And all the past stuff too. And you're like, yeah, from all eternity, there's just this block of time, like a block of cheese. And you can slice it up and all those slices are just there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, that seems really incoherent. For one thing, that radically breaks from our experience of time. Okay,
Yes.
that doesn't
Yes.
mean that it's not true, but that certainly makes it difficult for us to intuitively grasp. But I think that
Correct.
that's kind of at root in some of like Lewis's language when he's talking about God being able to look to his left, right, and then
Mhm.
to his right, and see the whole thing from beginning to
Yeah.
end. There's an assumption there that is that if he is taken at face value, what he's doing is assuming or asserting a B theory to make that kind of a statement, because that kind of a thing isn't possible on a presentist ontology of time.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
and so the spatial language there. So two issues you brought up. So one is experience. The other one is like you've got the spatial metaphor. Of God could look to the left or the right of the timeline. So people who affirm eternalism, they're very explicit about the fact that they are spatializing time. And some of
Right.
them will say like that's actually what we need to do. We need to fully spatialize time because that's what like physics demands. And then Tim Maudlin, who's like one of the world's leading philosophers of physics, will go, no, no, the physics does not demand anything of the sort. In fact, it seems like it's temporalizing space, and I'm like, I don't quite understand what that means, but like, whatever, cool. You keep going, Tim, because he's like really brilliant. So yeah, so they're really explicit. Like, yeah, we're spatializing time. With the experience thing, you're right. Like, it goes completely counter to all of our experiences, and this has been a major research project for about 100 years or so. In particular, in the last like 20 years, a lot of literature from people who affirm eternalism going, how do we make sense of temporal experience? Um, uh, Giuliano Tarango just came out with a new book, I think like just a couple weeks ago on temporal experience. Because like, and this has been a big project of his for like 20 or 30 years of trying to figure out what's going on, because that's how big of a problem it is if you affirm this view. Whereas if you affirm presentism, you're just like, experience one thing and then another.
It's a lot more simple and,
Yeah.
and carries a lot fewer pieces of baggage. So
Yeah.
this is another interesting thing. So when I hear concepts, for example, like four-dimensional,
Mhm.
okay, that sounds like B theory entailment to me. Like you wouldn't posit a four-dimensional or even posit time as a fourth dimension unless you were assuming B theory language already. Am I
Mhm.
right about that?
For the most part, you will find some people who will say, because they're focused on the geometry of space-time in the special theory of relativity.
Mm,
Because the geometry that we have in, for this special theory of relativity, the Minkowski that we use, it's not true. Most physicists know it's not true, and they're trying to figure out how to replace it. But which I'm like, okay, good luck, man. Um, but they're also kind of worried about questions like, well, I can't find the present on the Minkowski view, and so there's been some people who will go, here's a way to find the present, where you just have presentism, and it's still got the 4D geometry, and I just feel like they're just playing with numbers, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I've become a bit of an anti-realist about a lot of different theories in physics, because when I talk to a lot of physicists, they're anti-realists themselves about
right.
it. And I'm like,
That's right.
well, if you can't
They,
be realist about it, then why should I?
physicists, I find especially, are really pragmatically focused on finding useful
Yes.
calculations and
Yes.
useful theories rather than true or real ones, simply because there's, for one thing, I actually kind of appreciate that, because there's almost like a development of like the human project behind
Hmm.
that, where it's not just endlessly pontificating about difficult to define ideas. It's like, how can we put this to work and make it
Yeah.
useful,
Yeah.
which is
It's
good.
it's easier. But
Right.
what I would like is that more philosophers and theologians and in the popular level, I wish they would hear that part, that we're just doing useful fictions. Because when a philosopher hears that, they're like, "No, you're being anti-science." I'm like, "I'm saying the same thing as Nobel Prize winning physicists. What do you like? What do you mean I'm being anti-science? Stop it." Yeah.
Right. I look forward to the day, this might be controversial. I look forward to the day that special relativity falls and is replaced by something more coherent.
Hmm.
But I don't know. You have to be pretty smart to disagree with Einstein, but I do.
Yeah.
I don't know if I do so intelligently, but I do. So, but then also language like space time, where you're just
Mhm.
kind of unifying that into a single noun, assumes that it almost is assuming, just by the linguistics of it, that space and time are part of a single reality, where they're not just inextricably linked, but almost substantively the same in some way. And that's
Correct.
all seems to me to be borrowing from B theory assumptions, that
Yes.
if we were to have good reasons for not assuming B theory, we would have good reasons for not adopting that language.
Yes, and you'll see that move a lot too. So sometimes Jeff Kapersky, he's got a good chapter on this in his book, The Physics of Theism, and he'll say what some people do to affirm presentism and physics is they'll adopt what's called like a 3+1 theory.
Hmm.
So you've got a similar geometry, but you're really fully acknowledging that space time's not a thing. Like
Mhm.
that's a mathematical fiction that gives us useful predictions. Space and time really are separate things. They're not one item. And so you've got three dimensions of space plus whatever time is I guess is the idea there.
Okay. So then presentism, because I prefer presentism. There are
Mhm.
good reasons to prefer presentism, again, aside from it just being an intuitive articulation of our own experience of time. But even just the ontological claim that this is what time is, the way that I
Mhm.
typically define this, and you can help me shore up my language here, is that the present is only ever what is always actual. When you said, you said the present exhausts reality.
Yeah.
I think that that's my new favorite way of saying that, but that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
The past, insofar as it exists, is not an ontological thing you can access so much as it is a complete record of past presence.
Mhm.
Okay. And then the future, again, not something that you can access, but it's pontification or prediction or prognostication about what might transpire in future presence, is the way that
Correct.
I've kind of tried to discuss this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And is that an accurate representation of what, like, broadly, because there may be other nuances and ways that people try to frame this up,
Yeah.
but would that be a broadly accurate way of describing what the presentist ontology of time would be forwarding as its postulates?
Yeah, that's typically it. Is they'll say the past just is like there's just some kind of record of events, and they'll have different stories of how you get that record, but you're not positing concrete things that are there floating around in the past. And same way thing
Right.
with the present. You'll say there's different ways to cash out how you're able to come up with the abstract set of things that will happen or might happen or
Mm.
predicted to happen, but it's not like there's things that are existing at other moments, like literally there, because those moments don't exist yet.
Right. Okay. And so then what we can say, if we're borrowing our language from earlier, is that if I were to describe the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and the burying of Pompeii,
Mhm.
that's a description of an event that transpired in a past moment. And
Correct.
that moment, when it was present, that was true at that moment. It is no longer true because time has continued and we're in a different moment
Mhm.
at which the event of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in that time is no longer transpiring.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Seems really intuitive to me. So where did we
Yeah.
get this atemporality from? Like why do we even, if it's so intuitive and we all
Mhm.
kind of embrace, we all experience it this way, we all much more naturally think about it this way, why did we even arrive at possibility that there might be atemporality of, or like, that we might have
Mhm.
eternalism, or why postulate things like divine atemporality? Why did we even go down that rabbit hole and waste what I think is thousands of years discussing about
Yeah.
nonsense?
So I only ever find myself existing at the present. And so I exist as a whole or all at once at this present moment. And that seems pretty cool. That's like it's a good thing. You might even be tempted to say like that's a perfection.
Mm.
But something kind of sucks though. Is like I lose that. I go to the next moment, and I'm like, well, I only find myself here at that one at the present moment. But you can conceptually divide my life up into a bunch of different parts because I do experience a series of these things. So I exist as a whole or all at once, but there's a different sense in which you could say I don't, because you can conceptually, in your head, you can kind of abstract different parts of me. They're not really parts, but in your head, you can like abstract them out because I have a series of moments. And so, whatever that perfection is that I just get some kind of taste of when I'm existing at the present, it's fleeting. It's very fleeting. Well, wouldn't it be better? Wouldn't it be better if there was a being that was completely perfect, that exists always at the present, and as a whole, all at once, without a before and after? Wouldn't that be like the real perfection? And that's like what kind of argument you'll see for timelessness. And you'll see them use this language of endurance existing as a whole all at once, which is what you and I do. And they'll use the language of presentism and go, right, there's something perfect about this, but it's all wrapped in this imperfection because as we all know, change is like imperfect, apparently, and so therefore,
Baldly asserted without
which
any
is
kind of backing. Yeah.
because all changes for the better or worse. You know that. We all know the thing. So therefore, and this is how the arguments typically go. And so when you see timelessness laid out, they'll go, eternity just means to exist without beginning, without end. That's pretty cool. But that could still be consistent with undergoing a succession of moments, like the eternity of the world, according to Aristotle. That is eternal, but it still undergoes successions, temporal. God,
Mm.
however, though, is going to be timeless. So God exists without beginning, without end, and without succession, and without temporal location. So it's
Mm.
this being that exists when, at the timeless now, the timeless present, without a before and after. So there's no succession, no change. That's the idea, and so that's some of the reasoning behind it. You've got assumptions about, hey, like it's pretty cool to exist right now as a whole, and you're like, yeah, that sounds fine. Plus other assumptions like, well, we all know changes for the better or worse. Like either getting
Right.
better or you're getting worse. Like, yeah.
Right. So we've got a hearty pour of some dignum deo theology, right? Like what ought to be fitting of God, which
Mhm.
smuggles in other assumptions that you're
It
not
does.
necessarily foregrounding, right?
Yeah.
And then the assumption that change is always for the negative, or it's always a change for the greater or lesser, right? And so if
Mhm.
there's the assumption that if there is any change in a perfect being, then that would be a change for the lesser.
Yep.
So they must be unchanging. Where I would think, okay, look, just two very, very simple examples. A change in a person's character, if a person's character is perfect and it changes, then sure, maybe that's a degradation,
Mhm.
right,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
their
yeah.
character.
Yeah.
But a clock that is perfect and accurately captures the way that we measure time in seconds, minutes, and hours,
Mhm.
that is unfailing in its ability to perfectly track the movement of time, changes accurately every
Yeah.
second. And it's ever changing because of its perfect measurement of time. So
Correct.
change, when we're talking about both of those things, I think are perfection statements about change and time. And one of them involves no change, and one of them involves constant change in order to maintain perfection. So I don't think that we, even just with that example, we can't say, I don't buy the idea that change of any kind is a change for the greater or less.
Yeah.
Then, so if we can just kind of put that to bed, when I think about God's relationship to time, okay, I will simply assert this. We can prove this in a different conversation, or I can do a different video or whatever. But I'll simply assert that the Bible completely repudiates that view.
Oh, yeah.
That
I think so.
It's on every page.
Yeah.
God is assumed to be interacting with time. The timeline of what transpires in the heavenly realm as God and his heavenly host are observing things transpiring runs parallel to time on earth. God experiences sequence. God experiences moments. God, again, in my view, because I'm an open theist, I see God interacting with things in time, anticipating a future reality that he hopes will take a certain shape. He'll anticipate hopeful events that he hopes will transpire in moments to come. And then they don't happen. And he expresses frustration when he gets to the moment that he thought the event would transpire and it doesn't. So I'll just set that whole thing to the side. Biblically speaking, philosophically speaking, why is it not required for us to use atemporal language to describe God? And why should we prefer, philosophically speaking, divine temporality when we're describing God and his relationship to time?
Yeah. So both views, temporality and timelessness, they both affirm that God is eternal. So God exists without beginning and without end. And if you have arguments for thinking that God is a necessarily existent being, and there's a lot of those, well, then you get eternality for free. Because if you are a necessarily existing being, you have to exist. You cannot fail to exist. So you're not going to begin and you're not going to cease to exist. So you get eternity for free. So any philosophical argument for God being necessary only gets you eternal. It doesn't get you to God being timeless. What the temporalist says is God exists without beginning and without end, but God does have temporal location. So like he exists right now, which doesn't sound that remarkable, but that's it. It's God exists right now. And God can undergo succession. God can do one thing and then another. And I want to say that this view has a much better fit with all sorts of other things we take to be true about God. So necessary existence, like I said, you just get eternity for free. If you think God is perfectly rational, and you think God is all-knowing, and you think God is perfect in power and freedom, I want to say all of these have a much better fit with temporality than timelessness. And here's why. So freedom is the ability is like you're the source of your own actions and you act for a reason. This is what typically distinguishes an intentional action from like you like start scratching your ear without even thinking about it. Like, there's no reason there like behind. You're not like, I meant to do that. Whereas a free action is supposed to be intentional. You do it for a reason. And you've got the ability to do otherwise at the next moment. And this is not some newfangled view on freedom. Like that's a direct quote from like Peter Lombard, the guy who Aquinas had to write his commentaries on. He's like, yeah, freedom is just the ability to do A or not A at the next moment. And he's getting it from Aristotle. So this is like not a newfangled view on freedom at all. And I'm like, right, okay. So it has the time thing built in there right from the start. And when Peter Lombard goes, yeah, we want to say God's free, but without all the time stuff, how do we do that? Well, I'm not going to tell you. I got to talk about other questions. And I'm like, thanks, Peter. Whereas I want to go, no, you just can't get rid of the time stuff. But to be free really does mean being able to act or not act at the next moment. Because right now it's too late. You're doing whatever you're doing. The next moment's not too late. You could do something else.
And they're mutually exclusive claims. They have
Correct.
to be mutually exclusive claims.
Correct.
That if something is timeless and it is atemporal, then we can't, again, smuggle in some of those like linguistic. And that's where I think logical moments come from. So it might make sense for us to now talk about logical moments where the idea is there has to be, for example, we're talking about God's natural knowledge, right? And then his, I think it's his free knowledge. There's all these different things where you have logical moments that could theoretically take place in one temporal moment.
Correct.
But then also like the temporal moment, if we're talking about sans creation, also gets really muddy. So we're just postulating an entire concept of like, we want to use the time language to describe things that aren't temporal simply because we've assumed beforehand that time doesn't exist in, without creation. So how do logical moments, like, I don't even want to ask you how they make sense because I don't think that they do.
Yeah.
But how do we undercut the assumptions that lead to logical moments as a thing that gets advanced as a theory, and then
Yeah.
replace them with they're just temporal moments in God's existence even
Yeah.
before creation?
Yeah. So I actually have to explain it slightly in order to see why you should just make them temporal. What are you doing, bro? So here's the problem. So creation ex nihilo says that prior to creation, God exists all alone. There's God and nothing else, because God doesn't create from pre-existent material stuff. There's just God all alone, and then God exists with a bunch of cosmic stuff. And so there's several problems here. One, how are you going to get God being timeless if he exists all alone and then exists with a bunch of stuff? Another set of problems is creation ex nihilo involves God acting freely, for a reason. And then you also want to build in, whatever theory of providence you affirm. Be an open theist, you could be like a theological determinist, you could be a Molinist, whatever theory of providence you want to affirm, you got to explain, like, what's the rationality going on there? How's God making like some sort of decision-making process? All at a
Hmm.
single timeless moment that lacks a before and after. And so what you get is this problem that's inherited, of going, God's natural knowledge, God knowing himself, that just gives God knowledge of all necessary truths, like all the things that could possibly be. It doesn't give you anything about like what could contingently, like will in fact exist. It doesn't give you anything like that. And so you've got to figure out, how do we get God from knowing I exist, nothing else exists. There's a bunch of stuff I could do, but there is no fact about what I will do. How do you get God from going there to God going, his free knowledge going, I want this universe with this particular timeline where this is exactly how the future is going to go. So now God knows the future because his foreknowledge, according to Calvinists and Molinists and Thomists and all that, is based on his free knowledge. It's based on his so you've got God not knowing anything about the future because there just aren't no facts about the future, to God knowing the future. How do you do that without a transition, without a time, without different moments? And so this is where the logical moments come in. So Scotus is like, let me tell you. So,
Scotus,
and he's like, let me do it first with a temporal moment, because those are the ones you're familiar with, right? Timeless stuff, that's weird. Temporal moment. Can an angel exist for a single instant and sin? So pops into existence and then like sins, and like then all of a sudden it's gone. And you might go, that's not enough time. And then the Scotus is like, no, hang on a second. What if there's these logical moments embedded within a single temporal moment? They have the same kind of structure as temporal moments. They're a way things are, but could be subsequently otherwise, but it's not a temporal subsequent. And there's a lot of this kind of winking going on throughout the whole explanation of going, it's not time, trust me. And I'm like, it looks like time. He's like, I know, but it's not time. And I'm like, all right, fine. And so at the first logical moment, the angel is like, what should I do? And then over a series of logical moments, makes a decision to do something really terrible, like flip off God or something. I don't know. And then does that. And that's all supposed to be embedded into a single temporal moment. So the angel just comes into existence, flipping off God, and then is gone. And Scotus is like, well, embedded in that single moment is a whole series of these logical moments. So that's how the angel's able to make a series of rational deliberations and then a free act. Now you do the same thing with timelessness, and you get the same story of God's like, what should I do? Here's all these things I could create. And over a series of logical moments makes these decisions. But from all eternity, it's just God just doing stuff. And there's a couple of problems here. One of which is you're going like, you're just sneaking time into the story. Like, come on. Like, that's the really obvious one. Yeah. But I want to go, no, let's make it really explicit how bad this problem is. Because it's not just that you're clearly sneaking in time. Because like Paul Helm, who's like one of the world's like best living defenders of timelessness, that's his complaint about these things. He's a Calvinist and he's going, when you talk about these logical moments, we're just sneaking time in. Like, we don't want that because, we affirm temporality like Calvin did. Whereas I want to go, let's see what the problem is here. You've got at the moment of natural knowledge, God doesn't know the future because the future literally does not exist. And at the moment of free knowledge, God does know the future because he's determined like what will happen. So from all eternity, in the single moment, God does not know the future and God does know the future. That's a contradiction. And I can
exactly from a single temporal moment, God knows A and not A.
Correct.
It's the same temporal moment. Now, the other problem is that I see is that
there are timeless moments,
the same timeless moment, right?
Yeah.
Which again, that feels like a contradiction in terms. But then like temporal moments can also be, there are people who okay, there's not like a time atom or a chronon or whatever. There's all this other language around it, but like,
Yeah, yeah.
you could say that a moment is infinitely subdivisible, right? Where you have, how do you measure the length of a moment? Can you not also, if you have this moment and then this moment, can you not find a moment between them? Could you not find a moment between those two moments and then those two moments, and kind of have why are we baking in infinite regresses to our time discussion?
Correct. Yeah.
So you could postulate, even if you had those logical moments, well, aren't those logical moments themselves also like temporally arranged from one another? I don't think logical moments makes any sense.
Yeah.
I never have.
You get
I
weird
struggled with
stuff
this
real
when I
fast.
first started. Yeah, I struggled with this when I first started really studying this. And William Lane Craig, somewhat ironically, helped me out of this in terms of his God entering into time, and then he's timeless, sans creation, and entering into time. But I quickly moved on from that view too, because it was also incoherent. So we've got a divine temporality. I simply assert, if you're a Trinitarian and you think that the Trinitarian community of love has forever been existing in relationship to one another, if there was ever a moment that the Father, this is all sans creation, right? If the Father expresses love to the Son and then the Son returns love to the Father, that is a sequential event that took place between the Father and the Son. If that has ever happened, you have time. Okay. So time, this is kind of the crux of it, I would think, at this point. Do we say that it is a property of God himself? Is it something that exists separate from God, that God also experiences, that's co-eternal with him? If this is too difficult, like where do we start to find some ground there? Because I think it's, again, it's intuitive to say that God experiences time even sans creation, but what does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you go with the view that time is an attribute, like an essential attribute of God, then you've got God as that natured entity that makes change possible and is the source of moments and all that. So the divine persons loving each other, that's a way things are, but could be subsequently otherwise. So them just simply existing and loving each other, you got a moment. You got at least one moment. And that's all you need. I mean, you're
Right.
You could be.
I think it's very simple to extrapolate from there and say, well, if there's ever been a reciprocal love relationship where love flows, let's say, from one of those of those beings to the other, that's continuous moments, continuous events transpiring in other moments.
Yeah. You don't even need that though, because on this view, you're saying time just is an essential attribute. And part of the nature of time is that it's this thing that is the source of moments. So you don't even need to go into this argument. But the argument, I think what it does is it helps you see there's got to be some kind of before and after going on here. Like it helps you like get in the neighborhood, at least of this view. It doesn't get you to this view, but it would help you get there. There's another view you could affirm though, too, where it's not an attribute of God. This is a view that it's very nebulous, but you see it a lot. So there's this guy named al-Baghdadi. He's an Islamic thinker in the 1000s, not the 10th century, the 1000s, who has this view that Richard Swinburne also affirms, which is that time is like the dimension of possible change, and time it just depends for its existence on any concrete being that exists. I guess if a concrete being exists, you can say, well, there's a when that it exists. And so if God exists, well, there you go. There's a being. So therefore time exists. And so since God's eternal, time's eternal. So this is like, it's a view in the neighborhood of saying time's an attribute of God, but it's not saying that. It's something a little bit more vague and nebulous, but it's very like there's a long history of this view in the West.
And I could see that being defensible, and then you'd have to talk about the implications from there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So is there one or the other of those that you favor?
I like the attribute view better because it's the one that you're going to see me develop a bit in my little book about a big God, which just came out, and then my Divine Time Maker book, which I think comes out in January of 2025. I think that's what the publisher told me, which is annoying because it's done. It's just sitting there. But I tried to develop it a whole lot more. And the more I developed it and tried to trace down the history of it and see the arguments for and against it, the more I was like, this just makes sense. So I might have just like corrupted myself into thinking this view is like right, or I might have convinced myself to reason an argument. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
Your honest, everyone does that, but your honesty
yeah.
about it is refreshing. We don't admit our own biases or even that we have them really too
Yeah.
often, I don't think. But
No.
so I prefer that too.
Mhm.
And that would also be there's a parallel conversation happening with space, like God's spatial existence, and there's all this other stuff. But I prefer that because then this allows me to do what I've been on Trinity Radio the past couple of weeks twice in live discussions with Braxton Hunter and Jonathan Pritchett, and Leighton Flowers was on there. And we were discussing time, and it was as difficult as have experienced, and as difficult as you might imagine. So all three of those guys are Molinists, right? And you're a Molinist, and I'm an open theist of some flavor, right? There's Dr. White called my form of open theism something of a mutant form. But
I thought that was so weird because I was like, this is pretty historically established view. You know what? I mean, Calvinists in the 17th century were debating people who are open, but it's a mutant form. It's fine. You know?
I found it hilarious. It's just it's good rhetoric. It's good debate rhetoric. Depends on if you're trying to convince your opponent or if you're trying to convince the audience, what his strategy was. I think his was to convince the audience.
Most
and mine was too, for the most part.
Yeah.
So with that said, when I went on there and we were discussing time, I tried to articulate a difference between the existence of time and then the measurement of time.
Yeah.
Right. So when I think about God existing, I almost said in time, and I would have had to punch myself, but God existing temporally, okay, with an experience of time, you can have that existing before and during and then after the creative event, right? But then the measurement of that time seems to me, again, let's dig out the scriptures again, because we're Christians here. If I'm digging out the scriptures again and I'm looking at the scriptures, the discussion about time seems to be relative to the creation, but it doesn't seem to be like ontologically dependent upon the creation, if that makes sense.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. So what's the guy's name? Gershom Bren has this book called Time in, I think it's like the Hebrew Bible and the Dead Sea Scrolls, something like this. So he's trying to look at like all the Hebraic concepts of time and stuff. And he says the earliest moment of time mentioned in scripture is of the reality prior to creation. And so he's got in mind Psalm 90, where it says like, from everlasting to everlasting, before the foundations of the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Because all of the biblical terms for eternity are explicitly temporal terms. And
everlasting.
Yeah, right. Everlasting is a temporal term because the olam, it just means a really long time. And the author there uses a dating format that you see throughout the Old Testament, from the days of King so-and-so to the days of like this other king. This is what was going on. So the from to formula is a dating formula to denote a stretch of time. And so what the psalmist does in Psalm 90 is from olam to olam, from everlasting to everlasting, using the dating term. So saying from like this really long time ago to this other really long time ago, there's God before creation. So
yeah, I think also, I think of 2 Timothy 1:9, where he's talking about the grace that was given to us in Christ Jesus. I think it's pro chronon aionion, right? So before time eternal is essentially the way that it usually gets translated, but it's before. So there's a before relationship, temporally prior on the timeline. Okay, if we're assuming a line of sequential time, before the beginning of like time in eternity is essentially what that sounds like to me, right?
Yeah. That sounds weird and confusing, but like, here's how you can make sense of it. So when you're looking at a lot of ancient Greek texts, they'll use time words to, sometimes they're trying to refer to time. And in other instances, they're referring to just the universe itself.
Right.
So when you look at some of these biblical passages, I think it's safe to affirm that, are they making some stupid contradiction like there was time before time? Because that'd be really unfortunate. Or are they saying there's this like age that, like a certain like set of events, some sort of age, that before that there's like God doing some cool stuff. And then right now during this present age, God's doing some cool stuff. And there's an age to come where God's going to do some really cool stuff. Well, there's some judgment. Some people won't like that part, but there's going to be some resurrection. Like that's pretty cool. Maybe they're just talking like that, like, like a normal colloquial kind of way, without all the stupid contradictions.
That is, and that's so interesting to me too, because I think that a lot of people lament, and I don't want to lay rightness and wrongness or oughtness or shouldness on top of this lament, because I understand it and it is what it is. But a lot of people lament that the scriptures aren't more precise and aren't more clear about very obvious and clear definitions of certain things. And it is what it is. I think of literally the first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the Hebrew, it is not that clear to say in the beginning. It's basically the Hebrew equivalent of like way back when.
Yeah. Right.
So when we look at the scriptures, again, it's like we might almost be looking for clarity where it doesn't exist there. But what is assumed to be the case feels like God is temporal. Presentism versus eternalism. Presentism is to be favored. Time exists before creation, but begins to be measured at the event of creation.
Yeah.
You look at Genesis 1 and 2, you've got the sun, moon, and stars being given for the keeping of times and signs and seasons, and things like that. So that's the whole set of assumptions, that if I'm laying the Bible at my axiomatic root of where I get truth from, those are the sorts of things that I expect to spring forward, and I expect to get is God is temporal. The present is all that actually exists. The past is something that is discussable. It's not something that still exists or has continued to exist, but it is something that God existed during that time, because he's from everlasting to everlasting, right? So God existed at that moment. And those things are an accurate record of past presence. The future is something that is not an accessible thing in and of itself, but it's prognostications or it's predictions about what will come in future moments and events. But the present is all that exists. And this gets into kind of like Truthmaker too. Like when I think about truth makers and correspondence theory of truth, you can make a statement. This actually gets into a question that I think is relevant to like the Molinist and Open Theist discussion, which is, I can make a statement. I'm a person, I'm a human. I'm made in God's image, but I'm not God. I don't have the same ontological nature that God does. But I can make a statement about the future that I view as a prediction about what will come to pass. And then if it does not come to pass, does it make me wrong? Like I may be proven wrong in the future about the thing that I stated, right? That seems intuitive, where the thing that I said would be true ends up not becoming true. And so then my past statement was false, right? Is there anything wrong there about like truth makers and how things come to be labeled true? Is there anything that I'm off on?
Well, okay, there's a couple different issues here. So one is about our language about the future. What are we doing when we make a prediction? And then there's the things that like what explains why your statement is true or false. And then one theory about that explanation is Truthmaker theory. So there's like a couple different layers here. So I don't know which one you want to talk about. So if you want to talk about Truthmaker, we can do that, and then we can talk
beginning
about
to end. Let's say beginning to end. So maybe most broad claim to most specific claim. Where you saw me, because I said that, and I knew that there were probably several philosophical layers of things that I was smuggling in without thinking about it. And I want you to help me think about it.
Yeah. So when you're talking about the past, it seems pretty straightforward. Like you just want to be like, Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States. Like, there we go. True. And why? Well, I guess that's just the way the world was. Whereas a Truthmaker theorist is going to go, now hang on a second. That's no. You need something that exists in reality that makes it true. And you go, well, what exists right now that makes it true that Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States? And the Truthmaker theorist will say to the presentist, there's nothing that exists right now to make that true. So you can't even, so when you said Abraham Lincoln was the president, there's nothing to make that true. Now there's a lot of different answers you could give. And I do some of this in the Time Maker book. So one of the things I do is go, well, if you are a substance dualist and you affirm that absent from the body, present with the Lord. So there's this thing called the intermediate state, a place where you go while you're waiting for resurrection. Abraham Lincoln does exist right now. Okay. Yeah, there's some stuff that exists right now. A lot of Truthmaker theorists won't like that because they're like, that's cheating. And I'm like, why? I'm not allowed to bring in my theology to like other things I know to be true to be like, yeah, what cheating just means is you said something I didn't like. That's eventually what it turns out to mean. Because they'll do the same thing too with like Alan Rhoda is an open theist. He says it's J.R. Lucas. He's also an open theist. They both say the same thing. What makes it true is God's memory. Like God remembers all this stuff from the past. He's got this infallible memory, and God exists right now and has these properties. I've seen different truthmaker theorists go, well, that's cheating because now you're going against naturalism. I'm like, why did we bring in naturalism? Why are we bringing in like, so they're bringing in all these other things so it's not truthmakers. It's just at all. And other people though, who are affirming, who are naturalists, they don't care about these theological debates at all. They just think, when I said that Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States, and now you're forcing me to bring in all sorts of metaphysical baggage to explain what makes that true, I have to say the past literally exists. Well, that's still not enough. I have to say that there's these temporal counterparts of Abraham Lincoln that existed.
Right.
And I have to say, and it's not enough. You have to keep going and going and going.
And now we're back into B theory.
Right? Yeah. And so Ulrich Mayer, who's very much a fan of the B theory, and very much like not interested in theology in the slightest, he just goes, you are forcing people who are making very benign statements to start saying all sorts of absurd things just to satisfy a truthmaker. Maybe truthmaker theory is just leading to absurdities. Maybe it's not actually helping us discern like the right metaphysical theory. So he's like, just get rid of it. What makes it true that something was the case in the, well, that's just the way the past was. End of story. We don't need truth makers.
Right. It was true at the time. And so, yeah, that's very interesting because truthmaker, I think, can be a really sort of cancerously, almost toxic assertion of presentist ontology of time, where it's making such a hard line delineation between the present is all that exists, that statements about the past or even presence in the past, things that were presents, becomes absurd. And I don't think that that's fair to the past. And I don't think that actually creates any kind of contradiction in presentism either.
Correct.
Where if we, that's why I try to frame the past as it is as a thing. It's not something that is temporally accessible. It's already past. It no longer exists in reality, but it is an accurate record of past presence, right? What transpired in past presence, because this present is the product of past presence and events that transpired in moments in the past. So this present moment, we have historical documents that delineate that Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States, and that explain, events and actions and thoughts and words that he brought into existence in past events that we now have record of them, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's not to say that they weren't real, but like a real ardent, sort of a strident truth maker or theorist might say, well, those things aren't true anymore. Even like the only things that can be true are statements about the present, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what makes it so weird, because like, so the records you point out, this is actually a common argument against presentism, is go, well, we've got records of all this stuff. And I'm like, well, imagine all the records get destroyed, like all the libraries get burned. That's happened in the past, so that's not out of the realm of possibility that some Vikings will come and destroy everything, like
as they do,
as they do. As, we've all experienced, we've all been there. So they'll be like, all the records get destroyed. Well, now there's nothing to make it true that Abraham Lincoln was the president. And you're like, well, that's just absurd. And so what I think what is so much better about the response to say, that's just the way the past was, end of story, there's no need for truth makers, is it gets you out of these kind of objections, because it's not the record. Like all our historical documents that we have right now, that's not what makes it true that Abraham Lincoln, those things are about Abraham Lincoln, and they're trying to accurately record what Abraham Lincoln did.
After the fact, temporally subsequent to the event.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just, that's just what happened in the past. End of story. This other stuff is trying to capture that, and it gives us epistemic access to it, but it's not the metaphysical foundation of what makes any of this true. It just is true. End of story. That's just the way truth works. And so you'll see like Jonathan Talent, who's a presentist, this is his view, and he says, just get rid of truthmaker theory. Patrick Todd, who's an open theist and a presentist, he'll do this. But then there's a whole bunch of people who are eternalists about time, or like growing block theorists, or people who just don't like presentism at all, who are saying the exact same thing of going, truthmaker is just weird and nuts. Get rid of it, because that's just the way things were. No more to the story.
Fascinating. Okay. And that's good. That's helpful. Now, truthmaker, again, can be such a cancerous and toxic version of this, but like, would a softer version be sort of just the standard? I know J.P. Moreland talks about this quite a bit, like just correspondence theory. That which corresponds to reality is what's true, right?
Yeah.
that's a softer claim.
Yes, because the Truthmaker is giving you a version of how do you make sense of how truth corresponds to reality.
Right.
Whereas like the people who are saying that's just the way the past was, end of story, they're saying it corresponds to the way the past was,
Mhm.
but they're like, there's no need for details. There's no more details to give. Whereas the Truthmaker theorist is going, there's more details.
Right.
Identify the Truthmakers.
Right. So this is all really helpful. And I think that we've done enough of what I was hoping to do in order to bring us to the point where I wanted to talk about the future. Okay.
Yep.
So this is I have no rancor or any like
Mhm.
any I have my own view of this, but I'm genuinely just openly curious, and I'm setting aside presuppositions. I'm open to wherever the evidence leads, wherever the best arguments go. But my understanding of the future, I articulated it some in the debate, right? That it's the way that I view the future as it starts from the present, right? And we're
Mhm.
prognosticating about an infinitely branching series of possible timelines that could resolve, that all zip down into a single line of what transpired,
Mhm.
called the past, right? But that the present is alethically and ontologically, or the future is alethically and ontologically and epistemically open, that
Mhm.
there are openness aspects to it. And so that's my assertion. And that's kind of the way that I view it as an open theist, that it could go this way, it could go that. And that maybe when we're talking about God's knowledge and his infinite understanding and his infinite intelligence and his infinite wisdom, sort of the Boydian infinite intelligence argument
Mhm.
about God's ability to predict the future, right? That what we land on is sort of a neo-Molinism, right?
Mhm.
Where there are things that in Molinism, my understanding of it, okay, and you might push back on this, but when I think of Molinism, I think of the middle knowledge being the knowledge of the truth values or the outcomes of all possible subjunctive counterfactual. If this data set, then this output pairs,
Mhm.
right? And it's will happen, not might happen. It's will happen. The neo-Molinism just sort of imports the idea of, well, this God has if this then that may happen. Like we don't have would counterfactuals exhaustively. All things are
Mhm.
will happen or would happen counterfactuals, but we have some might and coulds as well.
Yeah.
Sorry to just dump all that on
Yeah.
you, but that's my understanding of Molinism, and that's my articulation of an open theist view that's kind of
Mhm.
like a neo-Molinism based on some Boydian thinking.
Yeah.
If I just kind of like vomit that all into the table and push it over to you and say, "Hey, can you help me make sense of this?"
Mhm.
What would you say in response?
Yeah, so my wife is a molecular biologist, and so when she was asking me, like when we were first dating, and then like and then after we get married and whatnot, she's like, "What are you working on?" I'm like, looking at all these different models of God, trying to make sense of them and identify arguments for and against. And I tell her about open theism, and she's like, "That's the only one that makes any sense. Why do people not like it?" And I'm like, "Well, there's the Bible," and she's like, "Oh, okay, we'll go other than that." And I'm like, "Well, okay." There's this question about is God taking too big of a risk when he creates a universe because he doesn't know the future, because he doesn't know exactly what's going to happen. And her lab was working on these things called risk management systems in molecular biology. And she's like, "Well, open theism doesn't think God's an idiot, right?" And I was like, "Of course not. Like, he's all powerful, he's maximally cognitive excellence. He can predict the future with like amazing accuracy." And she's like, "Well, okay, well, he would just put risk management systems into the world, like to mitigate the risk, which is the exact stuff that my lab is studying." So we wrote a paper on this called "Open Theism in Risk Management: Its Philosophical Biological Views." And so what we do there is articulate basically something like Gregory Boyd's view, where God knows here's all the possible timelines that could branch from this present moment, and here's the objective probability of any of those particular timelines coming about. But that's not the whole story that Boyd tells, because Boyd's like, God also knows that here are certain timelines that I don't want to happen because then my entire plan for creation gets derailed. So I'm going to put in certain things in place to just completely cut those timelines off. So they're not even possible anymore. But a bunch of other timelines, I am going to make sure that I have this exhaustive contingency plan. So I'm going to, if things start to go down this one path, I'll put in place certain things to make sure that it goes back where I want it to go. So what you have with the open theist view is you've got God coming with an exhaustive contingency plan, putting things in place if necessary to get things back on track. and knowing the objective probability of all these possible future events, and a willingness to nudge things if needed. And what you'll see from a lot of open theists is not just nudge, but if God really needs to, he'll just unilaterally override people's free will, because you might need to do that every now and then. And then I'm like, okay, there you go. You get risk somewhere, but not the kind of risk that I think your average open theist talks about. I think like what my wife and I came to conclude was that the way open theists talk about all the risk involved, I think they gradually just completely exaggerate massively how much risk is really involved here. Because God's not an idiot, he'll put in risk management systems in the world. Like that just seems the rational thing to do.
Right.
No,
And
yeah,
just to kind of speak to that, because I know
Mhm.
that there's more coming, and
yeah,
I'm grateful for all that's coming. But when I think of this, biblically speaking, I think of, again, I granted, for the sake of argument in the debate, and also I think that there's a really good case to be made that the
Mhm.
entire redemptive project was something that was known ahead of time, how it would be brought about. There may be some shifting of the timeline when certain events
right,
will transpire, right? But the idea that Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2:7 that we speak of God's wisdom in a mystery that was hidden, foreordained, right?
Mhm.
Proorizen, God, by God before the ages for our glory,
Yep,
which was the entire redemptive project of Jesus, right?
yeah,
Jesus incarnating as the Son, being himself the new Adam, the new Moses, and all of those different callbacks and types and antitypes and stuff like that. Jesus coming, incarnating, living a sinless life, dying in some way, whether that was had to be on a cross, whether he had to know the identities of everyone for whom he was atoning in the act of dying on the cross. Those are separate questions from
Mhm.
the fact of the matter. The fact of the matter is, biblically speaking, the data is that whole project was planned and
yeah,
prepared and in place as the rescue mechanism before creation. That's
yeah,
just what the claim is. And I don't
yes,
think there's any way around it.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. So here's the
And I don't think that that's
objection.
against an open view, but
No, I think that just is the open view. But you
right.
can start questioning some of the specifics. So TJ Mawson at Oxford, he's got this really nice argument called a divine bodgery argument. So bodging is a very English word. Scottish don't use it. It's very English though. And so you bodge something when you intend to bring about a particular outcome, but then you just you don't do it. So like I
Mm,
intended to make a baked Alaska, but I just failed miserably at it because it's kind of hard to make one of those, and I have
mhm.
very limited cooking skills. So I bodged it. And so what Tim does is he'll look at all these cases and go, okay, here's the open theist idea, the whole plan, all the contingency stuff, all everything we built in, and he's like, well, God only knows the objective probabilities, so he's going to intend to do something. Well, he could bodge it up, and even the fact that he could bodge it up, that's enough to show that God's not as perfect as he could be. So Tim's got like this background assumptions about perfection that I think are really good.
Right.
So like even the possibility that God could bodge, like that seems bad. And I'm like, okay, well, in response on behalf of the open theist, I started thinking, if God's got all this probabilistic knowledge, what exactly are some of his intentions going to be?
Mhm.
Surely he's not going to be like one of these overeager gamblers and just go like, I'm going to put all the money on this. I know this is it. I know this is it. And just come on, baby, please, please. No. God's going to hedge his bets. Like he's going to go, I know that I want to become incarnate for, the sake of entering into solidarity with humanity, for the sake of salvation, because I know these humans, when I create them, they're going to screw up. Like I need
Mhm.
to bake in to this whole project forgiveness, redemption, the whole thing, because that's the only way you're gonna like really be able to work with creatures like this. But God, for some reason, wants creatures like us, and so He's gonna know all that going in. But like when exactly He does all these things, God's gonna be different on all the different timelines. And I would think that God's like, okay, my intention is to become incarnate. When exactly? I don't know. It's gonna happen on one of these timelines, so I know that it's gonna happen. But when? We're gonna have to see. He's not gonna
Mhm.
say this is the only exactly when.
Mhm.
When exactly will like Tim or Ryan like accept my offer of friendship and forgiveness? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm intending to offer that on all the timelines, and I'm intending to do all these things on no matter how it unfolds to make sure that it happens. But like when exactly it
Mhm.
happens, I think God would be smart enough to not like make that prediction because He knows how all the objective probabilities are and that they change from moment to moment. So yeah,
Yeah.
so I think he's gonna hedge his bets.
Yeah. So again, kind of just going back to this is the part where the
Yeah.
scriptures are really going to get foregrounded for our discussion. And like,
Mhm.
I wanted to have the philosophical background and the
Yes.
time language and the definitions and stuff sort of pretty well defined before we landed on something to talk about these things. And we get into temporal language in the scriptures and how that stuff works. But I really straightforwardly see things like, John says that God could bring new sons of Abraham out of these stones. He could make new sons of Abraham out of these stones. Meaning, like, look, there's no way you're going to actually thwart his plan. He can bring, you can cut off, and he's ascribing. This is another thing that I find really frustrating in my conversations with Calvinists is that why even posit evil beings if God's ultimately the one bringing them, causing them to do what they do and think what they think and want what they want.
Yeah.
It's really odd. But, the Bible seems to always be looking at the activity of evil beings as the explanation for evil outcomes and evil things transpiring in the world. And then God is working against those things to bring about his purposes. But he can always kind of find a way forward. He can always find a way to make the plan continue in some way, which speaks to me of like contingency language. He seemed to desire a world in which free will was a feature, and free will necessarily allows for the possibility of freely reciprocated love, which was what he seems to be angling for on a Molinist scheme. That would be like what he's optimizing for, right?
Correct. Yeah.
The maximum number of people maybe who freely choose to reciprocate love to him in response to his loving overtures, right? His desire to bring people into a loving relationship with him. But that necessarily allows for a possible rejection of him and desire to move away from him. And that's just kind of what he gets when he bakes free will into the creation. But then when I'm starting to look at this in terms of future relationships, I'm seeing like Peter say, what kind of people should you be then? Or what kind of lives should we lead? Lives of godliness and obedience, hastening the day of the Lord, right? Where he's seeming to say, okay, well, there's a day of the Lord coming. And it's like, by our behavior, we can either temporally relocate it closer to us as to when it'll transpire, because there's a certain set of conditions God seems to be looking for. Or if we're disobedient, the implication that's silent and not written, but it's an implication, is that if we're disobedient believers, that it sort of lengthens the time horizon for when the day of the Lord might come to transpire. And that's assuming a whole bunch of stuff about the day of the Lord and stuff too. But
sure.
So that's why I'm looking at this in terms of an open and settled view. And the way that I framed it up in the debate, and I'm sorry for again the word vomit here, but there's no other way out but through.
Yeah.
The way that I framed it up in the debate is that there are three views that seem to say that the future is a line of certainty. Now, my Arminian and Molinist friends pushed back on that, saying, well, no, there are possibilities. There are other possibilities. They're just not open possibilities, right? There are possibilities of what could happen that just have a 0% chance of actualizing, right?
That's certainty.
It's certainty.
It is certainty. Here's what they should have said.
Yes,
because it's certain. It is certain. And this is you see this in Molina. You see this in a lot of everybody this is certainly what's going to come to pass. Because God has this exhaustive foreknowledge. So it is certain that it's going to come to pass. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to come to pass. So you're supposed to make the distinction. If you affirm exhaustive foreknowledge, any of you who are listening, if you affirm exhaustive foreknowledge, this is the statement you should make. It is certainly the case that this is going to happen. It is not necessarily the case that this is going to happen, because it is a genuine possibility that things be otherwise. But then you have to start explaining what grounds that, or what explains that possibility. That's where it gets weird and tricky. But you shouldn't say it's not certain. Be like, no, it is certain. It's just not necessary. It's and you'll see Calvin, he'll do the same thing too. He'll be like, it's inevitable that this will happen, but it's not necessary that it'll happen. So Calvinists make the same kind of move.
Yeah. And that's where I'm like, okay, it feels like the certainty of a statement about a future event in terms of all the specifics, and especially what I view to be the claim of all three of the other views, is that everything about the future, including what will transpire which events will transpire in which moments, all of it being exhaustively foreknown ahead of time, to me feels like if it's all certain with 100% accuracy, then it feels like it would move in the direction of necessitarianism. For me, that's my view. That's what I think is a logical entailment of that. again, people could make arguments, but I think that that collapses into necessitarianism. And then it also feels to me like the truth value
Mhm.
of a future statement is set ahead of the actualization of that thing in the event in that moment.
Right. Yeah. Well, it is. Like, I mean, that's the
Right.
the
That's
nature
the
of
claim.
propositions about the future is like this is what will take place, and that has a settled truth value of true or false. Yeah. So this is one of the worries that I have that I don't have a good answer to about Molinism. So I had a lot of like worries about Molinism, one of which was the grounding objection. And when I
Right.
saw that it was based on Truthmaker theory, and then eventually came to realize Truthmaker theory is so weird and nuts. Like, just get rid of it. Okay, well, there we go. Well, I don't know how to articulate the grounding objection without truthmaker theory. So, okay. So what's left? Oh, well, this whole thing about free will and foreknowledge. Oh, that whole thing. Was a very big problem. Um, Now, here's something I've had conversations with Patrick Todd about this a bit. So he's an open theist, but he makes this point that I've seen others say as well, which is the mere fact that there's a set of things, set of propositions about what I will do that doesn't obviously undermine my free will. There has to be more to the story. And that story that you tell about why those things are going to, in fact, happen, that is what's going to explain why you do not have free will. And so trying to explore those different options is one that is like part of the next big project for me is to try to look at a lot of different like details here. Because just that, like, yeah, this is what you will do. Like, I will go eat lunch after this. Therefore, I
Mm.
don't have free will. Oh my God. No, no. Like, there's got to
Right.
be something else that explains it. And the Calvinist, I think, has a great story of how God knows the future. He knows what's going to happen because he knows he's going to cause it. And I'm like, well, now I can really see why I don't have free will because God's going to cause me to do stuff. Like, that's really obvious to me why I don't have free will in that case.
The
And
claim is clear.
yeah.
If it makes it very easily refutable because of
Mhm.
how clear it is
Yes.
why that's not the case. Again, if we're gonna place the Bible at our axiomatic base,
Mhm.
if we're gonna have it anywhere near our axiomatic base, and it in some way communicates truth to us, and it is in some way divinely inspired, and however we land on,
Mhm.
inerrancy and inspiration and things like that, and infallibility, the story that the Bible is telling seems to not be that one.
I
Um,
mean, all this stuff about like God, God's not going to tempt you. God's not going to be the author of sin. And I'm like, okay,
right.
if he directly caused me to have all the thoughts that I have and caused me to have all the desires that I have and then caused me to act on certain desires,
Mm,
tell me how he's not the author of sin. They're like, well, because you have your own causality. I'm like, can I cause things by myself? No, God has to cause you to cause things. Right.
mm,
Okay. So the clarity that you get from some Calvinists, because some contemporary Calvinists, they want to tell you conveniently incomplete stories to hide how robust and clear the view is so they can avoid objections. But the people who don't do that, then you can see all the problems right there for everyone to see. And
yeah,
I appreciate that because clarity is what I want as a philosopher. But
yeah,
oof, it's a hard worldview to maintain. My gosh. Yeah.
yeah. And it's unlivable and, causes all sorts of problems with your decision making and
I think it
you
can.
become
Yeah.
necessarily it tends that way. Trends
Yeah.
in the direction of passivity in terms of your decision making. It trends toward inertia, not towards action, and it divests, it removes power from the decisions that you're making, and it removes agency. And if you don't let it do that, it's because you're going against the implications and entailments of the view rather than
Yeah,
living
so this
consistently with
was
them.
a debate that Erasmus and Martin Luther had,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Erasmus was saying everything that you're saying. And my friends in Finland, Aku Vasala and Ali-Pekka Vainio, they have a great paper on this where they're like, here's the debate between Luther and Erasmus. Now here's a bunch of cognitive science that's happened, since then, because a lot of cognitive science has only happened recently because it's only a recent science. But
Mhm.
all the cognitive science backs up Erasmus's claim. It's like, yeah, when people really do think they don't have free will or don't have this kind of responsibility or this robust autonomy, they really do start to engage in anti-social behavior instead of pro-social behavior. And they really do start to like withdraw within the. So it's like, oh, yeah, it's not just like this. There really is a very real tendency that we do observe in reality with this stuff.
Yeah. Just in terms of the behavioral
Yeah.
psychological impact, that seems to be, unavoidable that that's where it leads to.
Yeah. And then a Stoic will say, this is what you should be doing, right? Like you have no free will. So you should start to, meditate in these kind of ways. So like the Stoic just builds a whole like lifestyle around this. And you're like,
Hmm.
So we've got great examples in history and today of like that this is a thing that can in fact happen.
Well, and so yeah, that's a whole other whole other can of worms, because I would also affirm, like, again, I'm an open view person, but I think an overwhelming majority of things were determined for me by other things, by antecedent conditions that
Sure.
brought me, to this moment. I have much less say in the circumstances of my life than Jonathan Pritchett's always saying free will is not a superpower, right?
Right.
I
Yeah.
have will to do something, but then like even my power to bring that about is different from my will.
Mhm.
And then the whole set of things that brought me that were true, and that this gets into Truthmaker again, but which is funny, but all the things that happened before that bring me to this moment, I had zero control over.
Yeah.
And I'm brought into this world in a set of circumstances that I had nothing to do with. So, like, I don't think that equals determinism,
No.
right? And it doesn't equal a repudiation of free will simply because things were determined for me by antecedent conditions. And it's not even divine determinism, right? Saying God determined all those things is yet another claim.
Yeah.
But people seem to think that because I'm an open theist, because I adhere to free will, and then I think that that means that there are probabilities, ontologically speaking, of what may happen that God knows as might happens and could happens, not as woulds and wills.
Mhm.
Simply because I think that people sometimes assume that that means that I think I have like some superpower where I can thwart
Right.
God and go against his plans or something.
I see this all the time on TikTok right now, and I am just going, have you ever read a book? Like, I mean, not just like a philosophy like book on free will, but just a book. Like, you know? And so when I see
Yeah.
this about free will, like I'm constantly going, every introductory textbook to free will written by actual people who know what they're talking about will go, yeah, your freedom is in a context. Like, duh. Like, and your
Yeah.
freedom doesn't mean like you can go against your like it's just stupid. No, no, of course. Like because freedom about like making choices. Well, I have to have a context. Otherwise, I can't make a choice.
Mhm.
So like, yeah, of course, things influence me. That's what I- to be a rational agent is to be appropriately responsive to objectively good reasons. So you have to be influenced in order to be a free agent. So yeah, I really do when I see some of these things where it's like, if you have anything that influences you, you don't have free will. I'm like, talk to anyone who actually like affirms free will. What are you going on about? Like, like read a book before you come back and have this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we're coming up on,
Mhm.
well, a good chunk of time here. So I
Yep.
want to kind of tie a bow on some of this
Mhm.
and then close us out with just a couple of questions. So kind of the last three things I want to talk about. I wanted to ask you what you thought of the line of reasoning and how you would respond to the same line of reasoning that I used against Dr. White in the debate, specifically just kind of in the opening statement around there's the three sort of blueprint worldviews. First off, I want to know if you think the charge lands against a Molinism or against your view. And then the other one being flexible enough to allow to split the difference between some things being determined by God, some things being exactly foreknown with 100%, we'll use the word certainty,
Mhm.
by God in advance of the event transpiring in a moment. And then in terms of some things being genuine open possibilities that God knows as possibilities ahead of time, to say nothing about like more extreme views of open theism, like a Chris Fisher, for whom I have a ton of respect, right? And he's got good textual arguments. But I want to know how you feel about that argument. And then I would like to know kind of like, if it's accurate to say that you're a Molinist, okay, why not the open views? Why don't you accept the open views? And then we'll talk about metal music.
Yeah.
So we'll start from the top.
So okay. So the blueprint argument you laid out was like things are either like fully determined. Um,
The three views say that there is to borrow Alan Rhoda's term, there is
Mhm.
a unique actual future.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
something that will transpire. It is a line of certainty from which there is no deviation in God's knowledge of what will transpire.
Yeah.
And it's a blueprint. And then my view is that the ontological shape of the future, so much as we can refer to an ontology of the future, is that we're making prognostications. This is a strict presentism. We're
Mhm.
making prognostications and predictions, and God too is making prognostications, predictions about what he thinks will transpire in the future, but it's subject to change based on decisions, based on emergent circumstances, based on
Mhm.
other things. And then that God dynamically adapts to that thing, but it's the only view that is not a settled line of what will happen. First off, do you think the
Yeah.
critique lands?
I mean, yeah. So like a Molinist and a Calvinist, they both have to agree that there's a thin red line of like, here's all these possible timelines of how things could go. But because God, on the basis of his free knowledge, has foreknowledge. So the free knowledge
Right.
there, on both the Calvinist and the Molinist view, at the very least, what it does is it alethically closes the future. So
Right.
there's a certain set of propositions about what will happen and what will not happen, and those get settled. And so there's a thin red line of like, this is how history is going to go. So yeah, they both have to say that. I think I think that's just an accurate statement of a description of what the view is. Um, so it's not even a critique. It's just like, that's just the view. Like, so yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you. I've gotten a
yeah.
lot of pushback for that.
Oh, but they would be saying that we have to say there's a thin red line. Yeah. And there's lots of ways you can try to capture the genuine, because you've got the alethically settled future. But that doesn't mean that the future is like causally settled. Like whereas on the Calvinist view, like it's
Right.
causally settled.
It's causally settled because God caused it to be that way.
Correct. Yeah. So the Molinist wants to say it's not causally settled. Like it really is like causally open. But that is what I'm going to do.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where they should
So
be
the
pushing
critique
back on that
lands,
point.
right? The critique lands insofar as the nature of what the future is that there is a unique actual future of what will transpire.
Yeah.
However that comes to be, whether
Yeah.
it's simply foreknown that the what will happen is what will happen, and that's kind of the classical simple foreknowledge Arminian sort of a view, or the God determined it to be that way, or some like middle knowledge mechanism. It is a line of certainty. It is the thin red line of what will transpire. So that
Yeah.
part's true.
I don't know how you could deny that without just fudging what
Yeah.
the historical position is. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, but people do that all the time. So
Okay. So that's really, again, really comforting. I've had a lot of people push back on that and say, you just don't understand X, Y, Z, whatever thing. I'm like, no, I think I understand it. And I'm not hiding from the implication. I used to be Molinist. I still have a great deal of love for my Molinist friends. I think it's the most intellectually consistent view. I think it's probably got the one with the narrowest standard deviations away from a kind of a settled core of affirmations, right? So like I talked to you, I talked to Tim Stratton, I talked to William Lane Craig. Generally, when it comes to God's relationship to the future, there's a pretty small amount of variance. Open theism is this big, huge playground full of people who have all kinds of different views.
yeah.
But so then the next question is, and there's no wrong, like I'm not looking for anything in particular. It's genuine, just open curiosity. Why Molinism for you, and why not some kind of openness view where there's, I've posited this slider of things that may be foreknown about the future in terms of that thin red line, right? Where if there's one or two branches, it's still open, right? All the way to God knows nothing. And I think that's crazy. Like we have no idea what's happening in the future.
Oh, yeah. That'd be
like my slider, if I'm putting that slider, if I'm putting I'm sliding it to the truth value, I think it's going to be a lot closer to the 99 than the 0.
Yeah. You don't want to go like full Aristotle or like,
right.
Left and
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or like process theism, which is another whole thing. But like, why the 100% version and not the 99.9% version?
Yeah. Well, if it was just 99, like, yeah, if so say God creates a universe with certain intentions, certain goals in mind, and he's like, if I create the universe with these initial conditions and it's a 99.9% like chance that this is exactly how it's going to go, I wouldn't see the big deal there. I know like a lot of Molinists would be like, oh gosh, and I'm like, it's basically the same thing. What's going on? I'm like, well, what's that like, slight chance that he could go wrong? I'm like, I don't like what would introduce that? Well, because creatures have free will. Well, he could make sure he puts in a contingency plan to make sure that doesn't happen. Like, I don't, I just, that I wouldn't see a big deal. But they're like, well, he doesn't know with certainty. I'm like, it's close enough. Who cares? Like, it's negligible. Like, so I mean, that's also the language that like William Hasker uses too, and Richard Rice, who are open theists. They go, like, could God fail to satisfy his purposes for creation? Oh yeah, it's a real possibility. They get like big song and dance to risk. Oh well, it's only negligible that would happen. I'm like, what was all this risks nonsense then you gave me? So that if it's just like 99, like I'm like, who cares? Like I just don't see the big deal. But if I go like more further than like more risky, Then I've got some slight worries, some slight questions.
Mhm.
So a few things though that would keep me going, that have kept me from open theism. One is still trying to make sense of the language of foreknowledge in Scripture, and I've read a lot of, I've read like Greg Boyd, I've read like all these people, so I know these debates going back and forth, and I just find myself going, oh gosh, I need to think about this more, and I don't want
Mm.
to because I'm doing other stuff that I'm
Yeah, right,
researching.
right. Hills to
And
die on, again.
yes, exactly. But it's one that I'm like, at some point, I need to sit down and rethink it. And then the other big issue, originally, I said earlier, they had the grounding objection kind of worry, and like I don't have that anymore against
Mm.
Molinism. But the freedom foreknowledge question is a very real question. So even though I want to say I don't see exactly how I do not have free will just because the future is alethically settled, that still feels a little bit weird though. Right?
Mhm.
Because it does seem like if I were to like stumble into a room and find a book written on there it says it's like an abridged book of the world, and it has like my everything that I'm going to do laid out in it, in like really shocking detail. I'm going to start to doubt, do I really have free will? And I won't know why I
Mm.
don't have it. But I'm going to go, it looks like it's already been written.
Mhm.
So I mean, there's a lot of questions there that need to be addressed, and I've not sat down to do them because I've been looking at all this other time stuff. So yeah, so that's so basically it's autobiographical of me going, I haven't focused enough on these questions to get like satisfaction in my head of like why exactly do I want to go open theism just cannot be the case.
Perfectly reasonable, perfectly reasonable. I think it's, if you're open to it in just the sense of like, I haven't studied it to say yes or no, but I'm preferring this because I think it makes more sense of where things are currently. And I want to just kind of leave that part settled in my thinking for now so that I can have time and space to think about all this stuff without dealing with all the metaphysical questions
Yeah.
over here. Totally great. That's
Yeah. And it's something I've
perfectly good answer.
actively done because, like, I mean, I've got papers defending Calvinism from certain objections. So I published those. I've got like 2 or 3 papers defending like open theism from different objections. And
Mm.
then what you'll see in the little book about a big God is me going, okay, say God's options are a Calvinist universe, a Molinist universe, or an open universe. Which one is he going to create? And I try to look at arguments for and against each view. And I'm like,
Mm.
So like, it really is an active project of going, let's think through this really as clearly as we can and do our best to defend every single view.
That's fun.
How are the chips going to fall? I don't know. I don't know.
That's fun. Well, it's cool. I'm glad you and I are connected at this juncture. So
Mhm.
if there's any way that I can contribute to that discussion as you're kind of going forward, I know myself, I know Warren, I know Alan Rhoda
Mhm.
would love to kind of be in and around your brain space as you're thinking about those things when it comes time for you to sit down and get a cup of tea and really chew on that stuff.
Yeah,
But
and I've done that with
I'm
Alan a few
satisfied with your
times.
answer.
Yeah.
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 Um, so yeah, last question for me.
Mhm.
Um, I once heard a description of time or of music that I really loved, and it was in the same way that we use decorations to adorn our spaces. We
Mhm.
use music to decorate our time, and I loved that thought. It was really just fun to
Mhm.
stop and think about. I do love decorating my time, and one of the things I love decorating my time with is heavy metal music.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask, in your view, how do you define big umbrella metal music?
Oh gosh, I don't know how to define that. I mean,
I'll give you my shot. I'll give you
yeah,
my shot
go
first,
for
and
it.
you can
Yeah.
tell me what you think. It all depends on the level of distortion on the
Mhm.
electric guitar. If you have what might be called an overdrive pedal, we're talking about rock.
Mhm.
Okay. But if you have a distortion pedal, a full on distortion pedal, and you start to get even just crossing barely over the threshold into like Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne,
Mhm.
where it's like just a little bit past overdrive for like a rhythm guitar or a lead guitar, I think now you're talking about metal. That's
That seems
my
fair.
way of delineating.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's not just any distortion pedal, though, right? Because like reggae is going to have distortion.
Hmm.
And then, of
Right.
course, I've been at I remember, gosh, one of these, because I used to be in like this metalcore band, and we did a show, and there was this reggae metal thing that played before us, and it was awful. I got there's no next way to put
Yeah. It sounds like a really
it.
you're like, I love sharp cheddar cheese
Mhm.
and I love peanut butter. So,
So
no,
it's just puzzling,
doesn't
like,
fit. That's great. Yeah. So when I was in high school, I know people give you a lot of grief about like the painted nails. It's whatever. My brother was like Marilyn Manson fan, and like we listened to Korn and Nine Inch Nails and stuff. So I'm familiar with like the chokers and the trip jeans and the painted nails.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. People are weird about it. But when I was in high school, I was a thrash metal guy, and I would still call myself kind of a thrash metal guy. I love Metallica. I love Megadeth, Slayer. In fact, this guitar here has played a whole lot of Metallica music in the day. But I had hair kind of like down to the small of my back because I was a, James Hetfield, Kirk Hammett. I wanted to do the headbanging thing. So that's kind of my genre. But I'm looking to branch out from that. I've tried certain things. I don't like death metal, black metal so much. The aesthetic isn't the problem. It's really just kind of like the feel, if you know what I mean. So, but I'm looking to branch out, and I know you are something of an expert on the matter. So, what are your favorite genres? I'm not going to limit you to one. What are your favorite genres of metal, and where would you suggest that I get started?
Oh gosh, like it varies. Like at the moment, I've been listening to a lot more deathcore, just because like they've got like fun breakdowns and stuff. Um, so I really like this band called Make Them Suffer from Australia,
Cool.
and they've been doing a lot more. I mean, they kind of like as every band they evolve over the years, and so some of their newer stuff it's a bit more not poppy, but it's got a little bit more pop stuff in there.
Hmm.
Um, and the whole genre of like deathcore as a whole, like it sometimes you'll have like weird, like kind of like pop synthwave stuff. So like We Butter the Bread with Butter, they're from Berlin. They do not take themselves seriously, as you would imagine from a name like that. Yeah.
Just alone from the name.
Yeah. And so sometimes they'll be like, let's just put in some like weird, like synthwave kind of stuff in this moment just to make it more dancey and fun. And then now let's go back to like the really like serious, like guttural, like, kind of thing.
Yeah, there you go.
So they're fun. One band that I really like that like they're just all over the place though. Electric Callboy. I was at a bar the other night that I heard them playing again. So my wife and I saw them it was last September. What they'll do is they want to just like mix a lot of genres together. So they'll be like, let's have some like really like fun dance music. And we'll have this like kind of cheesy pop thing where everybody can sing along, and then we'll go into the metal a bit and then go back out. And they do it in a way that works, because sometimes it's just like really kitschy and
Yeah, that sounds
cheesy.
really disjointed to me. You'd have to really kind of thread a needle to make that work.
Yeah, most bands cannot pull that off, and nor should you try. But for some reason, it just works with them. There's loads of fun.
Well, that's one of the things I love about Metallica, for example, as a band, is I love they have a really strong commitment to good melody, just really good melody throughout the whole thing. And if you listen to songs like Fade to Black or Nothing Else Matters or One, there's a real beautiful, like, they really focus on having a beautiful, we'll call it a verse, right? Verse structure. And then they get a really heavy chorus, and then they'll come back to a beautiful and melodic verse, and then back to a heavy chorus. And then they've got like a pre solo that tells you it's about to get really heavy. And then they do the really heavy solo with, a lot of like Kirk Hammett messing around on the guitar.
Yeah.
But I like a little bit of a melodic quality to my, I know, again, Greg Boyd's a metal guy. It's so funny. Greg Boyd's a metal guy. He's a pretty good drummer from what I understand. And he really likes like the Slipknot, where it's just like really
well, because that's very drum heavy. So yeah, it makes sense. He would like that.
He would love that. Yeah. So we've got Make Them Suffer. We've got Electric Callboy. If you were to drop a third on there, that's like, maybe those are more recent interests. If there's like the comforting, like security blanket, I go back to this just to enjoy some good music.
Oh yeah.
What would you say?
That'd be Zao for me. Like
How do you spell
that? So Zao. They started this in this Pentecostal church in Pennsylvania, if I remember correctly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's Pennsylvania.
Like any good metal band.
Yeah, because they're from like near like Lancaster or something. So this actually makes me not like Zao. There's a few different bands that are from like the middle of Pennsylvania. So like them and August Burns Red and stuff. And so they've created this whole like culture of going to play out in the middle of Pennsylvania. I live in Philadelphia at the moment. So they don't come to Philly because they're like, no, like we got to go back to our roots. And so everybody goes to the like middle of Pennsylvania. And I'm like, I don't have a car. I can't get out there. Like what? Screw you guys. Come to Philly where there's a major venue. So screw you. So I love Zao, but I'm also like, screw you because now everybody goes out to you instead of coming out to me. So yeah.
It's personal. It's personal.
It is.
I get it. Okay. I get it. Well, that's great. You've given me a lot to chew on, and I'm excited about all those three, literally all of this. I'm just really grateful for all of this. Seriously, thank you for your time. This has been super, life-giving for me because I feel significantly less crazy after having talked to you, even though I feel like almost everything that we landed on is really intuitive and really, fits with our experience and understanding. And I don't understand the sort of moralistic, fallacious outrage that comes about when we talk about divine temporality.
I don't know,
Um,
but it's
uh,
been there my whole career of people going, "What are you studying?" I'm trying to do a PhD on God and time. You can't do that. Well, I'm doing it right now. Like, what do you mean? So yeah, so
yeah,
no, it gets moral very fast. I've
yeah.
experienced that far too many times.
But hopefully, this conversation also can be a blessing to you in that I think that you're just making so much sense, and I'm so thankful that there's someone who's rigorously spending a career philosophically pursuing common sense answers, not just common sense answers, answers that are truth, looking for the truth,
Mhm.
but not discounting the common sense answer for being too easy
Yeah.
or leading to implications that we don't like because of reasons that are themselves not very well founded. And I just appreciate that about you in general. I want to model that in my own space, such as it is. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a PhD holder of any kind, but this is what I try to do in my space as well. So thank you because you've modeled that for me strongly. I hope that this conversation helps you to continue doing the work that you're doing and to feel not crazy for pursuing it. And on that note, I would like to just ask, obviously you've just come out with a book.
Mhm.
You're working on another one that's coming out in January. Tell us a little bit about the book that just came out,
Mhm.
about the book that's coming out, and about what your plans are for the future from there.
Yeah. So when I had a fellowship in Finland at the Collegium for Advanced Studies, and I was working on my next big book on God and time, which was like it's called From Divine Time Maker to Divine Watchmaker. So it's an exploration of divine temporality. And so I'm trying to go, here's all the models of God. What does it mean to say that God's temporal? What are your options? And then here's a bunch of different problems related to creation, providence, Trinity, life after death, evil. What are your options as a temporalist in terms of all these kind of things? And so
Mm,
it's going to be, so it's already done. The publisher's hands, they just got to print it. But I think it's January is when they told me. And so that's the this is going to be the most thorough discussion of divine temporality that as far as I know, has ever existed. So
wow.
it's a pretty big undertaking, and they gave me a second PhD for it, so that was cool. Um, so
Awesome.
yeah,
How many
yeah.
pages are we talking? I know this is going to
Uh,
be a hefty book.
I think it's around 175,
Really?
something like that, or
Shorter
two.
than.
Oh, no, sorry, 275. Yeah, no, it's long. It's a long one. It's
Okay.
longer than the end of the Timeless God.
Which was amazing and wonderful, and everybody should read that right now because
Yeah,
I don't want to say, "Hey, let's all have everyone wait for another 5 months to get the book that I'm
yeah,
excited about." You can certainly whet your appetite. I don't want to even say whet your appetite. It's a meal in its own right. But going and enjoying the end of the Timeless God is also a tremendous, tremendous read. I recommend it highly. It's extraordinarily helpful for clarifying a lot of what is so dang flabby and so wibbly wobbly about the language of time and the metaphors we use. Very helpful book. And then what was the one in between? It was the big book
yeah.
about the small
So
book
it's
about a big god.
or it's a so it's Eternal in Love, a little book about a big God, and so that
That's the one.
just came out. So that was one I. It was my dad and a few other people were saying you need to write a popular level book that is affordable because these academic publishers charging like $100, and I don't
Yeah.
get any money from that. So it's just like whatever. Whereas I wanted to write something that is actually affordable and it's short and sweet and where I can be more devotional than I typically get to be allowed to do and be more sarcastic than I'm typically allowed to do. Because academic writing, they don't like you to be a person. They don't like you to be
No
human.
fun. No
No
fun
fun at all.
allowed.
Yeah. So I had a lot of people who are not professional philosophers and theologians read over the earlier drafts of it to make sure that is this actually clear? Is it accessible? And everyone's like, yeah, it is really, and it's a lot of fun. It's very funny. It's also very thought provoking. So you're going to laugh, you're going to cry, you're going to learn a lot about the nature of God in between. And it's only $25. So like you don't have to sell your firstborn child to get it. So it's
It's a
nice.
steal.
It's
It's a
yeah.
steal.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm gonna modify my recommendation. If we're talking about things like eternalism and presentism and ontology and alethic, and if these words are kind of like hurting you, maybe start with the Eternal
Start
and
with
Love
yeah.
book instead.
Yeah.
And it's available now, which is awesome. I'm really excited. I haven't actually grabbed my copy yet. I'm eager to, but I just will probably pick up and devour just about anything you write because It helps me not to feel crazy. So
There
thank
you
you
go.
for all of that. If nothing else, thank you for helping me not to feel crazy. But also, thank you for coming on. Thank you for
Mhm.
spending the time with us. I am personally deeply grateful for your work, and we'll pray for God's best and all good success for everything that you're working on going forward.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
You got it, man. All right. Well, that'll do it for today. If you have any other questions, obviously, feel free to post them down in the comments. And then if you're open to it, I'll post some other links to things in maybe even including our metal band recommendations
There we go.
down in the description for people to go and enjoy. But that'll do it for today. So thanks, everyone, and have an amazing rest of your day. God bless.